This right here is the single greatest upgrade you can make for your Steam Deck. Actually, to be honest, this is empty. It's actually in my Steam Deck already. It's a 2TB SSD. I guess first of all, why did I choose to upgrade, and why should you consider upgrading as well? The main downside with the 64GB version of the Steam Deck is when Steam downloads games, right? It also downloads and saves some data in memory that it can use to maintain maximum performance, right? And that's essentially what a shader cache is. The main issue is that shader cache files can get very, very large, and from what I understand, they can only be stored on the internal SSD. You can download like other plugins and stuff to, move that around, but generally speaking, the stock Steam Deck, even if you get an SD card and fill it up completely with games, the issue is all of the shader cache is going to be stored on your internal SSD, and that's going to fill up very, very quickly indeed. So for most people, honestly, it's not much of an issue, but it is a good idea to at least consider upgrading your SSD eventually, especially if you want to dual boot OSs. So for example, if you want to dual boot Windows and SteamOS, because that gives you more space on your, obviously on your internal SSD, and all you have to do is partition your hard drive, and then boom, you basically have two separate instances for different operating systems. So first of all, I just want to say, don't be intimidated by the length of this video. I'm just trying to go through everything that I did, and all the difficulties I faced as well, and how to solve them. So the actual installation takes maybe like 10 minutes, and then with all the flashing and stuff, probably another 20-30 minutes. You should be done well within an hour, hopefully. So in terms of size, the most expensive Steam Deck model comes with a 512GB hard drive, but you can just buy much larger capacity SSDs and install them instead. So instead of the internal SSD capping out at 512, personally, I bought a 2TB one. I think probably the sweet spot is 1TB. So personally, I bought my 2TB SSD from Scan UK. So here in the UK, Scan is a big sort of like PC parts retailer. They sell like a bunch of stuff, and they've started stocking the Western Digital SN740, so the WD SN740, which I recommended previously as well, and it's probably the best bang for your buck. And in terms of price, I got mine for about £200, which is probably around $240 right now. So I literally got it shipped and delivered the very next day, so that was perfect. It was literally in my hands the very next day. You can buy them from AliExpress as well. They do work out pretty significantly cheaper. If I bought mine from AliExpress, it would probably be around £160 roughly. The only issue with that is, especially if you're in the UK, you are most likely going to be hit with VAT, which is another 20% by the time it arrives, and then customs and all the rest of it. So it might actually work out to be about the same price. If you're unlucky. If you're lucky, then congrats, you got it for $160. I didn't want to take the risk, and I wanted it to be delivered the very next day, so that worked out. Scan, highly recommend them. I'll leave links down below. Right, so I'll be showing off two separate methods in this video. The actual installation of the SSD is exactly the same. The difference is how you get SteamOS onto your brand new SSD. So essentially, you have two choices. You can either clone your existing SSD, basically copy and paste everything from your existing SSD onto the brand new one, and then when you put it in, everything is going to work as it did before. Or basically just install the brand new SSD and then put in a flash drive and just install SteamOS from scratch. It's entirely up to you. I did both because I love you guys. So here we go. So technically, you don't really need to do this step if you're going for the cloning method, but I'd highly recommend getting it set up just in case. So essentially, you're going to have to set up recovery media for SteamOS. That will require either a USB stick or an SD card of some kind. Technically, Valve don't recommend SD cards. They say specifically on their website to do it with a USB stick or like a flash drive or whatever, but it does work exactly the same. And I decided to use an SD card instead, just because nobody else on YouTube had really shown how to do it with an SD card, and it did work out pretty quick. I believe SD cards are faster. There's just a few quirks that you end up running into. So again, I'll walk you through all of that. So either a micro SD card or a USB stick of some kind, plug that into your computer or your laptop and just install the image, which I'll show you how to do. So you have a choice to make here, right? You can either use Rufus or Balena Etcher. So the thing is, if you're on a Windows PC, just use Rufus every day of the week. It's so good. It doesn't look as nice, and it seems a bit more clunky, but trust me, Rufus has worked every single time I've used it, bar none. It works perfectly. Balena Etcher, I've run into so many issues with this thing. On Windows specifically, if you're on Mac or on Linux, you don't really have a choice because you don't have the option to install Rufus at all. Generally speaking, people really seem to like Etcher, and it works well for most people. But for me, I have run into quite a few issues with it, so it's To download the Steam Deck image, just go to Google, search for Steam Recovery, click the first link, and then under step 1, it should give you a link to download the file. So just accept the terms and download. So to download Rufus, just head to Google and search for it. If you want the direct link, it's rufus.ie. Then scroll down and then click on the first link under download. To flash the image, make sure you select the correct device because it's going to wipe it completely. And then under boot selection, choose the file that you just downloaded from Steam. Click start and just wait. It's going to take a while, probably at least a good 10-15 minutes to flash the image, but then it should just work. If instead you want to download Balena Etcher, just go to Google and search for Balena Etcher. If you want the direct link, it's balena.io/etcher. Click on download and then click the appropriate download link for your operating system. And then to flash the image, choose the file you want to flash, choose the target destination, again making sure it's the correct one because it's going to wipe the data completely, and then just click flash. So one quirk about this, right, is if you're doing it with Rufus, then you can just choose the file that you downloaded from Steam and then that's it, you're good to go. Whereas if you're using Etcher, for me at least, it didn't work until I extracted the file and then it worked. If I tried to flash the downloaded compressed file, nothing was working. So then I did a bit of Googling, and yeah, on Reddit it seems like it is an issue for some people. So just bear that in mind. So before we get started, there's a few things that you're going to need. I'd highly recommend some sort of mouse and keyboard. Personally, I use these two. This is the Logitech G Pro X Superlight, and this is the Logitech K400 Plus. Technically, I didn't even need the mouse, just because this comes with like a trackpad as well. But having a dedicated mouse does make life a hell of a lot easier. So I'd recommend having both if you can. And you're most likely going to need some sort of USB hub or dock of some kind. You can use the official Steam Deck dock and then just plug them in the back. Or if you don't have the official dock, literally any USB Type-C hub will do. So next up, if you're going for the cloning method, you're going to need some sort of external NVMe enclosure. Personally, I went for this this Sabrent one, but essentially what you're going to have to do is take your brand new SSD, plug it in here, connect this up with the Steam Deck, and then, run some commands. Cool, so the first thing we're going to do is go to desktop mode. So we do that by holding down the power button, going down and selecting switch to desktop. So before we do anything else, I want to benchmark our existing SSD. So to do that, I'm going to go down to the software Discover Center and I'm going to install KDiskMark. Cool, so then we're going to go and open that up. Go to all applications, go scroll down to K and open up KDiskMark. And then yeah, I'm just going to run. Okay, so that's finished. We've averaged 305 megabytes per second on the read and 206 megabytes per second on the write. So that's a good benchmark. Let's see if the new SSD is any faster once we've installed it. Whoops. So there we go. This is the SN740, 2 terabytes. So we'll just put that up here. Here we go, nice and simple, and it's completely tool free. So yeah, basically you have to put the rubber stopper in first. You just insert your SSD at a roughly 20-degree angle, give it a bit of a push, and then basically you have to move the rubber stopper as far back as you can, and then boom, it's in nice and snug. So then just give this a close, and then we are good. So we're just gonna plug it into the dock. There we go. Back to desktop mode. Cool. So what we're going to do next is we're going to open up the console with a K for some reason. We're going to type in password, PASSWD, and we're going to create a new password. So let me just do that. Cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to run sudo lsblk. Then put in your password. Perfect. So now this is all the different partitions that we have on the Steam Deck currently. This SDA here is 1.9 terabytes. So that's this thing, right? That's the new SSD. Next up, we have this, which is around 478 gigs. So that has to be my SD card, which is again a 512 gig. So that makes sense. And then here we have the current NVMe partition, which is around 57.6 gigs. So again, because the internal SSD on this thing is 64 gigs, that makes sense. So this is the internal SSD. This is my SD card, and this right here is the new SSD. So that's perfect. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start the cloning process from the internal SSD over to the brand new 2TB SSD. So we're going to run this command. Right, so basically this command, this dd command, all it does is it moves data from one place to another, right? So I'll walk you through it very quickly. So first of all, sudo is the command you need to run to get admin permissions. So dd is the command you need to run to copy files across and convert them. Apparently it was supposed to be cc, but that command was already taken, so they just bumped it up to dd. And then if is the input file, of is the output file, i.e. where input is where you're moving from, output is where you're moving to, and then the bs is the byte size. So you basically split up what you're transferring into these chunks. In this case, the byte size, each chunk is 128 megs in size. The larger you bump this up, technically the faster it will go, but you may run into some RAM issues with your Steam Deck. So I'd recommend keeping it at either 128 or 256 megs. O flag equals sync, essentially synchronizes the input and output files. And then finally, the last bit, status equals progress. Essentially all this does is it shows you a progress bar as it goes along. And yeah, that's it. So it's nice and easy. It should just work. So I have heard of people running into issues with this command, but you know, it worked perfectly fine for me. Cool. So let's do this. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, so that's now done. So yeah, it's copied across around 58 gigs. Cool, perfect. So now we can take this out. Cool, so now let's turn this off. We're going to hold down the volume up button and we're going to press the power button. Then we let go of both. Perfect. So now we navigate to setup utility. We head down to power. We turn on battery storage mode. Perfect. So when you're taking apart the Steam Deck, I'd highly recommend some sort of like toolkit to help you out. Personally, I have the iFixit ProTech toolkit. This isn't sponsored. they would not sponsor me at this point. I bought this myself with my own money a while ago, and honestly, it really does help quite a lot. It's a solid bit of kit, and you know, I'd highly recommend it. I also have their like magnetic project mat. I got it for free as part of their like Black Friday or like Christmas deals. With this just helps for like sorting out all the screws and stuff. There's only really 4 types of screws, so it's not too bad, but you know, it does help. So specifically what you're going to need is a small Phillips head. Personally, I use a 00. I believe either a 00, a single 0, or a 1 should work. All of them should, you know, work just fine, but I think technically a 0 is the correct size. And then you're going to need something thin and fairly sturdy to actually get inside the Steam Deck to like pry it open. You can either use like guitar picks or like a credit card, but yeah, anything that's like thin and sturdy enough to like pry open the Steam Deck should be perfectly fine. So now comes the fun bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place down the official Steam Deck case and place the Steam Deck on top, just so it's nice and secure. So actually, first things first is we need to take out the SD card. This is extremely important because if you don't take this out before you open up your Steam Deck, you can very easily literally just snap it as you're taking off the back. So make sure you take out your SD card first. Right, so there's 8 screws. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So these 4 here are shallow, and these 4 here are the longer screws. So I think it's these are 4.5 millimeters, and these are 8.5. So all you need is a Phillips head, a small Phillips head, and you should be good to go. So that's the one out. Cool, so that's the 4 short screws out. Now time for the longer ones. Perfect, so that's our 4 short screws and 4 longer screws. And now for the annoying bit. We have to try and get this case off. So after a bit more research, it seems that most people found it easy to start here, near the top. So let's give that a shot. Oh, perfect, perfect. So that's the first few clips coming off. There we go. Much better, much better. So as you can see, it's starting to come off a bit, which is perfect. So now we just carry on working our way around. One thing that I really struggled with is taking off the back of the Steam Deck. And it's just honestly because I was too scared to use any amount of force. But the thing is, it's just a bit of plastic, right? With clips on the end. You really do need to use a good amount of force to actually open it up. So I recommend don't be too scared. Genuinely, you do need to like pry it open quite a bit. But once you have one side open, the other side should just, essentially fall open fairly quickly. So I actually had to open up the Steam Deck a second time. Spoilers. But trust me, the second time it was much easier because I wasn't afraid to just like crank it open. So yeah, it's not going to break. It's perfectly fine. Just use a bit of force. There we go. Yeah, I feel like I was just being a bit too gentle with this thing. No, just carry on all the way around. And there we go. We are now inside the Steam Deck. So now, essentially what we have to do is take this off. This is the heatsink. So I keep saying heatsink here, and I believe technically, according to the iFixit guide, it's not actually a heatsink, it's more a heat shield. But close enough, man, close enough. So there's one screw under here, and I believe there's another one here, and one up here. So two screws, one here, and then this third one under this thing. So those two screws are out. Now this, we are going to have to peel back with some tweezers. You could take it off, but you're going to need to put it back on afterwards. So it makes much more sense to just slowly peel it back. There we go. So now we take out this screw as well. There we go. So this entire thing comes off. So this is also very important. This right here is the battery. We need to make sure that the battery is not connected when we take the SSD out. Essentially, we cannot hot swap the SSD. The battery needs to be unplugged when we take the SSD out. So now what we're going to do is press the power button a few times, just to make sure the battery is completely discharged, and then we can go ahead and unplug the battery. So this thing right here is the battery, and this is where it's connected to the motherboard. So what we want to do is grab this sort of like flap here, and literally just slowly pull away. Very, very slowly. Just have to probably wiggle it out a bit. There we go. See? Okay, battery's completely out. That's good. Now, there's a final screw, this one, for the SSD. So we're just going to take that out. And now we can take this out. Perfect. So this right here is the stock 64 gig NVMe SSD. And so we can just take off the aluminium foil cover. It'll hopefully just slide right off. 4C. So this is the 64 gig NVMe SSD. So we can just put this to one side for now. I'll pop my thing back open again. Lift this back and just take this right out. Perfect. This is our 2TB SSD. So what we're going to do is pop the aluminium cover right back on. There we go. So that's off. Just put this back on again. Perfect. So that's back on. Brand new 2TB SSD. Just make sure this sort of like hole is at the top, and put it back in at a slight angle. Give it a bit of a push until you hear the click, and then we can just screw it back in. Perfect, so that's back in. Next, we're going to reattach the battery. So we'll pull this and just like sort of slide it back in. Okay, that seems to be in. Okay, so this is another very important thing, right? Push the battery all the way in. Spoilers, I ran into a bit of issue with this, but just make sure it's all the way back in. Trust me. So because we turned on the battery saver mode beforehand, to turn it on afterwards, because obviously the power button is not going to work now, you need to plug it into power, and then it should just turn on. Okay, that's promising. Steam Deck logo. Perfect. So that's back up and running. Now let's take a look and see if it's recognized the larger SSD. So where would that be? Storage. Perfect. So that's good. It's recognized the 1 terabyte, sorry, the 2 terabyte SSD. That's back up and running. Yeah, perfect, amazing. So what I'm going to do now is turn the device back off, and then we can just put everything back together again. So a couple of things to bear in mind as you're putting the heatsink back. So this right here is the cable for the fan. As you're putting this the heatsink back on, just make sure this isn't being pinched by anything. So this gap here is to make sure that the fan cable gets through without any obstructions. So yeah, just make sure that isn't being pinched by the heatsink when you put it back on. Perfect. So I believe if you do manage to destroy this, which I wouldn't recommend, you can just replace it with some aluminium foil. You just need to stick that back on. But again, try and keep the tape if you can. Perfect. And now we just pop the back cover back on. There we go. Just click everything into place again. So another thing is just make sure you don't over tighten these, because Valve have mentioned that after you take the Steam Deck apart for the first time, the screws rethread themselves. So yeah, just make sure you're not essentially destroying the thread on your screws by over tightening them. And there we go. So it's completely back together. Should be perfectly fine. Alright, so this is where I started to panic. At this point, my Steam Deck would not turn on at all, no matter what I did. The only thing I figured out is when I plugged the power back in, then it would turn on. But if the power cable wasn't connected, then no matter what I did, it just would not turn on at all. And after a bit of Googling, I realized this was probably something to do with the battery connector not being plugged all the way back in. So I ended up having to take the Steam Deck apart again. Alright, so guys, life pro tip. Make sure your battery connector is actually plugged all the way in. It seems like mine isn't. There we go. There we go. Perfect. See? So yeah, just make sure that's plugged all the way in, because I put everything back together, tried to turn it on, and it wouldn't turn on. Turns out I didn't actually plug this back all the way in. So yeah, just just make sure you push this thing as far in as it can go. That's promising. Okay, perfect. That's looking good. Just want to make sure again that it recognizes the SSD. Perfect. Yeah, the 2 terabyte SSD is right there. And yeah, that is perfect. Cool. So now let's do another speed test with the new 2 terabyte SSD. So let's give this a shot. So this is actually insane. The speed test shows that the new SSD is around 10 times faster than the old one. The thing is though, it doesn't really affect in-game performance or anything else. So it's nice to show like big numbers, but it doesn't change too much about the performance of the Steam Deck. So at this point, if you've cloned the SSD and it's working perfectly, you're essentially done. There's no reason to do anything else. You're basically up and running. So congrats. But yeah, if you didn't decide to clone the SSD, or you would like to re-image anyway, and just start from scratch, then feel free to continue watching, but honestly, you really don't need to if the clone was successful. It's perfectly fine. So very quickly, if you're enjoying the video, I'd love it if you could subscribe. It would mean a lot to me, and I'd really appreciate it. So yeah, back to the video. Cool, so I decided to re-image as well. Because I love you guys. Okay, so if you don't have access to an external NVMe enclosure and you don't want to clone your internal SSD, then the other way you're gonna have to do it is after you take out your old SSD and replace it with your new one, you're gonna have to re-image SteamOS. So I'm gonna show you how to do that now. So first things first, if you're using a USB stick, you're gonna need some way to plug it in. If you have a Type-C stick, then that's perfect. You can just plug it straight in. If you don't, then you're gonna have to get a USB hub of some kind. Now, if you're using an SD card, you have a couple of choices. You can either get a micro SD to USB adapter and then plug that in here as well, or you can basically just plug it straight into the SD card slot. So I have a drive in there already. This is my 512 gig Samsung Evo Select, and I use this to basically, I used this to store all my games. So all my games are currently on this, and what I'm going to do is basically just place that to one side. And this right here is just a 128 gig Samsung Evo Select, and on this I have the SteamOS recovery image installed. So first of all, I'm just going to turn it off. So shut down the Steam Deck completely. Confirm. Cool. So now that it's completely shut down, I'm just going to insert the SD card. If I can remember which way it goes, I think it's this way. Perfect. So that's in. So now what we need to do is get to the boot manager. So to do that, we need to hold down the volume down button and then just click the power button once. And then when you hit the chime, just let go of the volume down button. Perfect. So now we're here. The joysticks no longer work. You're going to have to use the trackpad to move the cursor and then the right trigger to select. And in this case, I want to select the EFI SD card. So I'm just going to click the right trigger. Cool. So then you'll find yourself in a sort of like desktop environment. So normally I believe that the trackpad should work. For me, for some reason, only the touchscreen seems to work. But nonetheless, you have 4 options in the top left, and you want to choose Reimage Steam Deck. So just choose that. It's just going to come up with a warning. This will permanently destroy any data on the Steam Deck and reinstall SteamOS from scratch. And this obviously cannot be undone. So if you want to proceed, just click proceed. And then Bismillah, we'll start. Now this might take a while, so you just want to make sure the screen doesn't go to sleep. I guess keep clicking around periodically. Okay, perfect. So that's pretty much done. So now, yeah, just click proceed to reboot the Steam Deck. Perfect. And we are back. None of my inputs seem to work besides the touchscreen. So this is interesting. We'll see how far we get. So this is where things get a bit funky. For me, at this point, the only input that worked was the touchscreen. Everything else was completely unresponsive. Your mileage may vary. Sometimes, other inputs do work, sometimes they don't. Don't worry too much. If all else fails, plug in, an external mouse and keyboard and go through with that. But personally, I just went through with the touchscreen and everything was fine. And then after it properly installs SteamOS, all the other inputs should start working again perfectly. Cool, so now it's installing. Cool, so it seems to be updating, which is complete now, and it should hopefully launch the Steam interface fairly soon. Perfect. So now that that's complete, everything works. So the joysticks work, D-pad works, buttons work. Perfect. Okay, cool. I'm just gonna speed this up by using the Steam app to sign in. And there we are. So this is a completely fresh installation of SteamOS. So this is, the onboarding screens, just like when you first signed in for the first time, and boom, everything is right there. So these are all the games in my library, and then if I go down to settings, let's take a look. Perfect. So that's great. It recognizes the 2 terabyte hard drive. That's perfect. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to format this SD card. So this is obviously the 128 gig SD card that I installed the SteamOS recovery image on. So I'm just going to format that first. So seems like this is a common error. So if you do want to format the SD card, I believe the only way to do that, or the easiest way to do that, is turning on developer mode, and then you can go down all the way to developer, and then if you carry on going down, here we go, there's an option to force format SD card. So you choose that. So one quirk of installing the recovery media on an SD card as opposed to like a USB stick or like a flash drive is that after you flash SteamOS, it's gonna be very hard to format your SD card. So what I ended up having to do is going back to desktop mode, opening up KDE Partition Manager, and then at that point I formatted it again in the settings, and then it worked perfectly fine. But yeah, you might run into a bit of issue with the SD card. But as long as you use KDE Partition Manager and just create a brand new partition, it should work perfectly fine. But if you've used like a USB stick, I don't think any of this should really be an issue. It should just work. You should be able to format it perfectly fine. So to format your SD card, if nothing else is working, what you have to do is you have to go to desktop mode, open up the application launcher, find KDE Partition Manager, choose your SD card. In the top right, click New Partition Table, choose MS-DOS, click Create New Partition Table, click Apply in the top left, and then click Apply Pending Operations. And then if you want, you can go back to gaming mode, go to Settings, System, and then go down to Format SD card. There we go, the 512 gig. Pop this back in. Go down to Storage. And boom, all my games are right there, just as they were before. So that's perfect. So actually what I'm going to do is go back into Settings. And now I'm just going to check for an update. Perfect, so no updates available, and we are good. That's it. Yeah, so now it's going to be downloading just a bunch of things. Probably shader cache stuff in the background. So I'm just going to let that go, and yeah, that's it. It's all up and running. So yeah, it's been a bit of a wild ride, but yeah, now you have a brand new internal 2TB SSD, or 1TB, or anything, you know, or 512 gigs, whatever. Now you have a much larger internal SSD, and now things get interesting because now you have much more freedom to actually do things with your Steam Deck. So stay tuned. I'll be trying to install potentially Windows quite soon, and then, you know, I guess we'll see where we go from there. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you are interested in my extended thoughts on the Steam Deck after having it for 6 months, click up here, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers. See ya.